everyone, this is Celine from Blue Calla Patterns, and in this video we're going to be making the Hibiscus Hanging Toiletry bag. I call it a toiletry bag, but you can actually use it for a variety of things. I will show you. Now this is the very first version I made, so I did make a few changes since this version. So on the exterior it has two carrying handles and this drawstring to tie it all together, and it does have one exterior pocket. And then if you open it up, it has three separate compartments. You can either use vinyl, clear vinyl like I've used, or mesh, whatever you prefer. I decided to use clear vinyl because I find it a little bit easier to work with. Mesh has less structure, so it's a little bit trickier to sew with. But you can use whatever you have on hand. In terms of the thickness of the clear vinyl, I believe this is a 12 gauge vinyl, which I got at my local fabric store. You could also get creative and use a shower curtain liner or one of those clear vinyl tablecloths, but just make sure it's not too thin or not too thick. So I'm using this one to store tools and supplies for one of my sewing machines. But in this video, I'm going to make one using some cute little sewing themed fabric that I found. So I'm going to go over the various pieces that you need to cut, and I'll show you where they are on this finished bag. Now, in terms of supplies, there is no hardware required for this bag at all. You do, however, need 4 zippers. Now, if you're using pre-made zippers, you'll need 4 14-inch zippers. I'm using zipper tape, and you need exactly 12.5 inches long, but I decided to cut them a little bit longer just to give myself a little bit of wiggle room, and they are 13 inches long. But if you don't have enough, you just want to use exactly 12.5 inches, you'll just have to be more careful when you're sewing all the pieces together. So this will be my exterior zipper that you see here. And these 3 will be my interior zippers. 1, 2, 3. Now, I'm not going to list out the cutting dimensions. You need to buy the pattern in order to have the dimensions. But on page 3 of the pattern, there is a cutting chart. I should also mention, now that I see this, that this pattern is actually a collaboration. So Michelle from Barabubu, this is her design, and I offered to write it up in a pattern for her. Okay, so use the cutting chart on page 3. I didn't do a whole cutting section in the pattern because there's really not a lot of pieces to cut, and they're all cut to measurement. Now, if you plan on making a lot of these and you're not good at cutting with a ruler and a rotary cutter, you could always just go ahead and create your own set of pattern pieces. I know that some prefer to have rectangle pattern pieces, but I made the decision to cut all these pieces by measurement because there's really not a lot to cut. Okay, so use the cutting chart on page 3. The dimensions are all listed beside the names of the various pieces, which I will go through right now. So you need 1 main lining piece. Now you'll see I've used 3 coordinating fabrics. This is my main lining fabric. This is my exterior fabric, and I'm going to do all of my bindings and accents in this yellow fabric. So here is my main lining fabric, and it only has a fusible woven interfacing. So that's all you need for this piece. And this main lining piece is the one that you're going to see here. So if you're using a directional fabric, make sure that you keep that in mind. I like to use a non-directional. It just makes it easier, and I don't even have to think about it while I'm sewing. Now, for the exterior, you only have these 2 pieces. So this one is the exterior upper panel, and this is the exterior lower panel. Looking at the bag, this is this piece, and this is this piece here, this big piece here. So here, if you're using a directional print as well, I'll mention it later when we're attaching the pieces to the zipper, how the direction of your pattern should be placed. If you can see here, I did use a directional print. Okay, so those are your two exterior pieces, and I'll be using this zipper with those. Now for this exterior zipper pocket, you also need two lining pieces. So these are the pieces, if we're looking at the bag, and you open up this pocket, this lining piece and this lining piece. Now, one of them is longer, this one is shorter, this one is going to be longer, and you're going to see why. Okay, so that's going to go with this. Okay, now interior pockets, the clear pockets. Now again, you can use a mesh or you can use clear vinyl. So it's very hard to see these pieces on the video. The dimensions again are listed in the cutting chart, so you'll need 3 pieces. Now if you don't want to use clear vinyl, you can use mesh. Let me just get a piece so I can show you what that looks like. So this is the type of mesh that you can use instead of the clear vinyl, and this you can get at any sewing supply store as well. It's pretty easy to find. Okay, your handles. I have 2 handles. Oh, I forgot to mention here, for these lining pocket pieces, I just have fusible woven interfacing on the wrong side. For the handles, you will need 2 handles, and that's the 2 handles that you see here and here. They only need fusible woven interfacing on the wrong side. I actually ended up leaving 1/2 inch at both of the short ends because you're going to be pressing these to the wrong side and it'll just make it slightly less bulky. So 2 handle pieces with fusible woven interfacing on the wrong side. Then you need your perimeter binding. So this is the binding piece that we're using all along this outer edge. And that needs to be cut on the bias. So what that means, if you see these diagonal lines on your cutting mat, these are what you use to cut these strips. So here you can see I have the selvage here. So you're placing your fabric as you normally would, like this, and then you're cutting the pieces on diagonal. You do need a piece that is fairly long, so you'll need to cut a few separate pieces and then join them. I'm going to show you how I do that a little bit later. Then you're going to need your zipper binding pieces, and I'll show you what those look like on the bag. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zipper binding pieces. I've gone ahead and started pressing them, but I'm going to show you how I did that in a little bit more detail here. So each strip, so you have 6 pieces, 5 of them are pressed in the same way, and then the 6th piece, all you're going to do is fold it in half lengthwise, wrong sides together, and press it. Okay, so the one piece is going to be pressed this way. For the other 5 pieces, you're doing this, you're pressing it in half, wrong sides together. You're doing this first. Then you open it up and you fold in each half towards the center and press again. And then you're going to fold that in half again. So you should end up with 5 strips that are 1/2 inch wide. It's like a double fold binding. So you can actually use prepackaged double fold bias tape binding if you like. I decided to make my own because I wanted it to coordinate with my fabric. Now for these pieces, I should also mention they do not need to be cut on the bias because we're not using them around curved edges. They're going to be used on straight edges only. So they do not need to be cut on the bias. Okay, I'm going to set those aside. And then the last thing that you need is your fabric tie. So that's this piece here. And it is quite long. So I did cut 2 pieces, and I'm going to join them, and I'm going to trim them so that they're the right length. And then this, the way that you press it, I'll show you this a little bit later, but you're really just pressing it the same way as these zipper binding pieces. So that's all we need to do. And now I'm just going to show you how to prepare the fabric tie and how to prepare your perimeter binding pieces. So when I'm making this bag, I like to get all of the pieces ready. So I get the handles ready, I get the perimeter binding ready, I get the ties ready, and I get my zipper binding pieces ready so that I can just go ahead and just assemble, and then it comes together really quickly once you've prepared all the various pieces that you need. So for my fabric tie, like I mentioned, I needed to sew some pieces together because it's longer than the width of quilt weight cotton. So I just joined 2 pieces together, and then I press the seam open, and then I'll just trim it to the length that I need. If I could find my scissors. There we go. Perhaps I should have done this off camera since it's horribly boring to watch. Doesn't have to be exactly the same length, just, you know, approximately the right length. Doesn't matter if it's a little bit more, a little bit less. Okay. So now I'm going to press this fabric tie piece, and I won't show you the whole thing because that would be a little bit boring, but you start by pressing the shorter ends towards the wrong sides together. I'm going to do that at both sides. And then you're going to press them the same way as the zipper binding pieces. So you fold in half, wrong sides together, and you press the entire length. I won't do the whole length, I'll just show you how to do it, and then you can do the rest. Then you open that up and you press each half towards that center crease that you just made. Again, wrong sides together, and do that with the top and the bottom. This iron is so hot. Okay, and then I just fold it in half again along that original center crease. So hot. And there you go. And you do that along the entire length of the fabric tie. So I'll finish that off camera. Then I'm going to take my handles and I'm doing the same thing, except these will be wider, obviously. So I do that 1/4 to 1/2 inch, it doesn't really matter, towards the wrong side on those shorter ends. And then exactly the same way as the fabric tie. Fold it in half, wrong sides together, and press along the entire length. And then open it up and press both halves in towards the center, wrong sides together. Try not to burn my fingers. I'm using my my fusible woven, so it's thicker, and so they tend to not stay down, but it will be fine. Okay, and then you fold in half again along that original crease and press. Okay, so I'm going to use some clips to hold this together. And I won't show you pressing the second one because that would be boring to watch. But you do the same thing to press the second handle. And one thing I forgot to mention for the fabric tie and for this, so press the two handles and the fabric tie, and then you'll go over to your machine and you have to sew all three pieces. So I have my other handle here. So for the handles, you can just sew all the way around. So it's like you're sewing a giant rectangle, and use 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the outer edges, and do that all the way around for this one and the second one. And then you do exactly the same for the fabric tie. It's quite a bit narrower, but I still sew maybe less than 1/8. But try not to go off the edge, and I just sew all the way around like a giant rectangle of stitching. Now we need to prepare our binding pieces. So you should have probably at least two pieces like so. They'll have angled edges. So what I'll do is, when I'm joining these pieces together, I find the other angled edge, and I just put them like this, right sides together. And when I'm joining them, I'm just sewing here at this little corner to this little corner here, and I'm sewing them with about 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then you press that seam open, and if you need to join more than two pieces, then that's what you should do to get the length of perimeter binding that's listed in the cutting chart of the pattern. So I'm going to go and sew this together so that I can show you what I do next. Okay, so I've gone ahead and joined a few pieces of binding. I have 3 pieces. I'm not sure if I'll need all of them, but I like to have extra. So all I do is press that seam allowance open, if possible. Okay. And this one. Okay, and then I'm just going to, you'll see there's little bits that kind of stick out, these little corners. I just trim those off so that it's nice and straight. And then all you need to do to prepare your perimeter binding is fold it in half, wrong sides together, along the entire length, and press. That's it. You can just do that and then set that aside. And it's that simple. So I'll finish pressing that, and then I'm going to finish pressing my second handle and my fabric tie, and I'm going to go sew them so that I can show you what they look like when they're ready. Okay, so I just want to recap everything that we should have prepared by now before we continue to the assembly. You should have your perimeter binding, and it should just be folded in half the entire length, wrong sides together. So that's your perimeter binding. Your main lining piece. Your two handles, which I showed you how to press, and I've gone ahead and I don't know if you could see the stitching in the video, but I went ahead and I top stitched all the way around with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Your fabric tie, which I also showed you how to press, and I just went and sewed all the way around all the sides with slightly less than a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance since it's so narrow. I don't know if you could see the stitching, hopefully. And then your zipper binding pieces. You should have 6 in total. 5 of them will be pressed towards the center twice, so they're double fold bias binding. And 1 piece of zipper binding that is just folded in half, same thing as the perimeter binding, okay? Folded in half lengthwise, wrong sides together, and pressed. You should have your 2 exterior zipper pocket lining pieces, your 4 zippers, 1 for the exterior, 3 for the interior, your 3 clear vinyl pieces or mesh if you're choosing to use mesh, and then your exterior upper and lower panels. And these 2 actually are the only ones that will have anything other than just fusible woven. So they should also have fleece fused to the wrong side, and I trimmed the seam allowance off of my fleece before I fused it to the wrong side. Now that's it for the preparation, and the next video we'll do the assembly of the bag.